Fellas, with how bad some of the matchmaking has been this year, I thought I'd create my own 2026 schedule, including a mega card to replace the White House, to a UK numbered event, to a Mexico fight night, a full schedule for 2026 replacing what the UFC has done. And we'll start off with the mega card, which is going to be an alternative to the White House card, so taking the money they invested into the White House card and turning it into just a good MMA card that MMA fans want. And if you can't tell who the main event is already, it's going to be Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria for the UFC welterweight belt, the biggest fight the UFC can make right now. The one super fight we've got of this era that we need. We missed Jones and Aspinall. We can't miss this one. If I was in charge of the UFC, why are you investing 60 million in the White House alone? Yes, he might get some numbers, but I think we need to invest in fights. Makhachev and Topuria is the fight to make. This is the biggest fight the UFC can do now, by far. They can easily do this fight. Offer Makhachev a bag, offer Topuria a bag. I don't want to hear anyone say Topuria's not deserved it, mate. This is a fight. This is a generational fight. This is one of the biggest fights the UFC can ever put on. So for this mega event, rather than the White House, let's do a UFC 300 Part 2. And the main event, Makhachev versus Topuria, the biggest main event you can have. Two pound for pound number 1 versus pound for pound number 2. Two rivals, two of the best in the UFC right now. It's literally the definition of an unstoppable force versus immovable object. Two guys just smashing everyone to bits in their way. Topuria versus Makhachev would be one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fight in MMA history. So for a mega card, if I was in charge, fuck the 60 million going to the White House. I'm putting it straight in Makhachev and Topuria. So for the main event of this mega card, Makhachev versus Topuria for the UFC welterweight belt would be the biggest fight, or one of the biggest fights MMA's ever seen. And I think we need something like this. We need a super fight. We can't keep failing these super fights. Let's get this one done. So I think Makhachev versus Topuria is the perfect main event. Co-main event, listen, if we're going to make this the mega card, potentially bigger than UFC 300, we need a big co-main event. I think there's few bigger co-main events you can make in the UFC than Justin Gaethje versus Arman Tsarukyan for the UFC lightweight belt. Now listen, if Ili's moving up to 170, he loses the belt at 155, takes on Makhachev. Gaethje versus Tsarukyan makes ultimate sense. I mean, you've got Justin Gaethje, obviously the interim champion, representing America. I'd say Arman's arguably a bigger star than Gaethje. With the media run that Arman's been on these past few weeks, I'd say Arman's really made himself into a bit of a star with what he's been doing on, streaming and RAF. Arman versus Gaethje is a massive fight, and again, it makes sense. They're two number 1 contenders at 155. Arman gets his title fight. Gaethje's obviously the interim champion, so he gets his title fight too. If Topuria's moving up, Tsarukyan versus Gaethje for the undisputed lightweight belt as a co-main event as well is a sick card. And just think about the press conference. You've got Ilia, you've got Makhachev, Gaethje, Tsarukyan, all them guys within a similar weight class. Obviously, 170 for the main event, 155 for the co-main event, but still, Tsarukyan versus Gaethje, perfect co-main event. And that's already probably the best co-main and main event we've probably ever had in UFC history. And then for the featured fight, I'm going to go with Jack Della Maddalena versus Carlos Prates. Now, obviously, this has been announced for the main event of UFC Perth, but I think it's the perfect featured fight that I'd have probably stuck on this featured fight anyway. I mean, you've got, the former champion in Jack Della Maddalena, who just came off a title fight with Makhachev. You've got Carlos Prates, who's one of the best highlight reels in the UFC. There's two main reasons I'm putting this on this card. First reason is because, first of all, it's going to be a banger. All the eyes on the world are going to be on this fight card. I reckon this is going to be one of the most viewed cards of all time. You need some big eyeballs on there. For Prates versus Maddalena, think about how many fans that fight is going to take in with how violent it's going to be. And second reason, it's at 170. Listen, if Prates ends up slumping Maddalena, there's no better statement to say that you deserve the next title fight than slumping Maddalena while the welterweight title fight's on this card. So I think Della Maddalena versus Carlos Prates, big, fun fight for this card. Perfect featured fight. Fourth fight down, I'm going to go with another fighting nerd. I'm going to go with Mauricio Hufi versus Michael Chandler. Now, obviously, this is for the real UFC White House card, but I have no problem with it. I think it's a good fight. You've got Mauricio Hufi, the human highlight reel, on the rise. One of the best guys coming up at 155 right now. From the fighting nerds, you want eyes on this guy, and let's put him against Michael Chandler, who is essentially a punching bag, and he's going to get absolutely starched out cold by Mauricio Hufi, but he's a big name, so it adds to the card, it adds to the name value. It's going to be violent. It's got big implications for 155 as well, which is fitting considering we've got a 155-pound belt on the line. So Hufi versus Chandler, I don't mind it on the White House card, and I'd also stick it on this card too. And then to open up the main card, we need a bit of a storyline. Listen, if the main event ain't big enough already, we need a fight that's going to bring a storyline to this card. Let's do Manel Kape versus Kyoji Horiguchi too. Now, obviously, this has just been announced for an Apex card, which I think is criminal. If you're going to do it anywhere, at least do it in Japan. But I've stuck it on this card. I mean, the storyline that these guys have had, two top contenders right now at 125. It's a number 1 contender fight. We've got a trash talker in Manel Kape, a legend in Horiguchi, and obviously what they've both done over over in different organizations. The first fight that they had, they've got bad blood. I know a lot of people want to see this fight in Japan, but I don't mind this being on like a mega card. And then maybe if Horiguchi was to win, you can do like a Horiguchi versus Taira for the undisputed belt in Japan. So Cat versus Horiguchi 2, perfect main card opener. But that's just that's the best main card ever. I don't care what anyone says. You've got Makhachev versus Topuria, one of the best fights of all time. Gaethje versus Oman for the lightweight belt. And then you've got Della Madlena Protes, Hoofy Chandler, and Cap Horiguchi. And we've even got some prelims for this card too. Peyton Talbot versus Ayman Zahabi. Zahabi's on the rise, Talbot's on the rise. Two guys on the rise at 135 right now. Put them against each other, two strikers. It's going to create a moment. You've also got Josh Hockett versus Stephen Asplund. Probably the best unranked heavyweight fight you can do. Two Americans, two loudmouths. I said loudmouths. Stephen Asplund's more of a nice guy, but two loudmouths who I think would have a scrap, and they don't like each other as well, so there'd be a rivalry there. You've also got like a Bo Nickel. Listen, if there is going to be a mega card, Bo Nickel manages to sneak himself on all the time. Do something like a Bo Nickel versus Michelle Pereira, and maybe like a Jacoby Smith versus Carlos Leal. Jacoby Smith, in my opinion, is the best American prospect right now. Stick him on this card where the eyes are on, and give him somebody like Carlos Leal, and we've even got some early prelims too. Veteran versus prospect, Cody Garbrandt versus Malcolm Wellmaker. You can do something like Michael Johnson versus Jim Miller, two veterans of the game going at it on a mega card. You can do something like Elijah Smith versus Gene Matsumoto, another American prospect versus an unranked Brazilian. And then to kick off the card, you can do something like Wang Kong versus Carly Judas, a violent women MMA fight. But already, that Makhachev versus Topuria card, this is a mega card already. And then we've also got a UK numbered event too that I think we could make. Listen, the UK needs another pay-per-view kind of card. I know they don't do pay-per-views anymore, but we need a numbered event. And the number one rule is that it has to be violent. Listen, it's never going to be violent if you do Murphy versus Evloev, or, you know, Edwards versus Brady, or Edwards versus Bilal. So the main event, if you can't tell already, is going to be Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane 2. I feel like they've got bad blood. I would have personally done this instead of giving Alex the Cyril Gane fight. Yes, I would move Alex to the heavyweight division, but I'd probably make him fight the winner of this. But yeah, Gane versus Aspinall 2 for the main event, I think would make perfect sense. Aspinall gets to fight in the UK. Cyril Gane gets a title fight. I know people are going to say it's an undeserved title fight, but I still think they've got unfinished business. So let Aspinall do the job. Let him finish Cyril Gane in front of the UK. And I think there's a little bit more hype on this fight too from how competitive Cyril Gane made the first one. So I think Aspinall, he deserves a UK headliner. Get him in the UK, get him against Cyril Gane, the rematch that needs to be settled, UFC in the UK. And then for the co-main event, I think a perfect co-main event could be Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje. If you're going to do an event in the UK, I feel like you've got to have Paddy Pimblett on there too. I mean, Paddy Pimblett is probably one of, if not the biggest British star in the UFC right now. And Dan Hooker's the perfect opponent. They've both lost to top contenders. They're both fun fighters. They'd both go out there and have an absolute scrap. And the rivalry as well. Can you imagine the press conference between Dan Hooker and Paddy Pimblett? These guys have been going personal as fuck online if you haven't seen. They've been talking about dead friends. They've been talking about personal issues. Pimblett versus Hooker for a co-main event at 155 is the perfect fight to make for this UK numbered event. And then for the featured fight, I do Diego Lopez versus Leroy Murphy. Yeah, we're not slowing down. Murphy versus Lopez is the perfect featured fight. Again, we're sticking with the theme of fun fights. You've got to have Leroy Murphy on there. I feel like if you're going to do an event in the UK, Leroy Murphy just main evented a fight night. He fell short. I feel like you've got to have Murphy on there. He's one of the best British talents right now. Let's give him Diego Lopez. Lopez is one of the biggest names in the featherweight division right now. He's lost to Volkanovski twice. He needs a comeback fight. This could even be kind of like an eliminator situation for Murphy, where if he beats Lopez, he could get a title fight because of how close his fight with Evloev was. So Lopez versus Murphy, it would be a fun fight. You've got the Britain Murphy, two big names. Perfect featured fight. Now, a British fight that also deserves to be on a main card of a numbered event is none other than Mr. Lonnie Kavanagh. This guy takes on Brandon Moreno on short notice, beats him, give him a big fight. Let's do Brandon Royval versus Lonnie Kavanagh. Everybody else is booked up. Pantoja's going to get a title fight, Tyra and Vanna fighting, Cap and Horiguchi fighting, which leaves Kavanagh with only Royval left. But I don't mind. First of all, another fun fight. Royval versus Kavanagh would be one of the best striking matchups you can make at 125. Probably Joshua Van versus Royval 2. You've also got obviously Kavanagh getting a step up in competition on a main card of a numbered event against a guy who could potentially give him a title fight. Royval gets to fight down. Again, I love this fight too. Fun fight, big implications. Then to open up the main card, I've got a little bit misfits with this. I've got a little bit off-road with this. But this is just a fight where the UK fans are treated to a violent fight. We've had to suffer through some fights like Brady versus Edwards and Edwards versus Bilal. We need a fun fight to kick off the main card and wake the fans up. Let's do Arnold Allen versus Terrence McKinney at 155. Yes, it's a bit random, but listen, Allen's been talking about how he wants to move to 155, so win or lose over Melchizedek Costa, mate. Imagine him at 155 against Terrence McKinney, or if I was in charge, I wouldn't even book him against Melchizedek Costa. I'd give him a main card in the UK. I'd give him Terrence McKinney, because Terrence McKinney is one of those fighters where no matter what card you stick him on, it's going to be good. It's going to be a first-round finish. He's going to get slept. He's going to sleep somebody else. Either way, it's going to be violent. Let's give him a British fighter in Arnold Allen who wants to move to 155. Allen versus McKinney to open up a main card. You can't really get better than that. So if you just look at this UK main card, you haven't got Luke Riley's the co-main event. You've got Aspinall versus Gone 2, Pimlet versus Hooker, Lopez Murphy, Royval Kavanaugh, Alan McKinney. And the thing is, arguably the best fight on the card is even on the main card. It's on the featured prelim. Chris Duncan versus Mason Jones. Chris Duncan obviously just lost to Moicano, but these guys, Scotland versus Wales, would put on one of the most violent fights you can have. I contemplated moving this to the main card, but I feel like because they are just both unranked, I wouldn't do it. But still, Duncan versus Mason Jones would be a violent-ass fight for the featured prelim. You can also do something like Nathaniel Wood versus Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett needs to fight down. He's still in the top 15, but he's washed. And Nathaniel Wood's done more than enough to guarantee someone in the top 15. So I think Nathaniel Wood versus Josh Emmett's a fair fight. I'd also do Hyder Emil versus Luke Riley. Step up for Luke Riley, who the UFC seem to want to push, and I think a fun opponent is Hyder Emil. And you could also do like a Brandon Perisic versus Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin's ranked, he gets to come back. Perisic deserves a top 15 name. And even some early prelims as well. You can do like a Sam Patterson versus Muslim Salikov. You can do like a Matt Fravola versus Jordan Vucenic. Chanel Dyer versus Ming Shi. Jack Jenkins versus Curtis Campbell. I think this has potential to be the best, biggest, and funnest fight in British UFC history. Fight card in British history. Get it done. It's really not hard. All we want is scraps in the UK. We need a fun card. This is that. And then for just a standard USA kind of pay-per-view card or numbered event card, nothing crazy, but just a good main card in America. So the main event's going to be Peter Yan versus Merab 3. I think like this has to happen next. Yeah, this has to happen next. They're both 1-1 against each other. One of the best rivalries in the UFC right now. The first time, Merab fought 50-45 to Yan. The second time, Yan 50-45 to Merab. And it's interesting as well because Yan dominated him in the... Well, I don't want to say dominated, but I thought he comfortably won their second fight. Whereas you can also argue that Merab, I mean, he did it the first time to Yan, and he had fought 3 times already that year. Let's give Merab time to recover and a full training camp, and let's get him in a main event with Peter Yan. It was a really good fight the first time. I don't think anybody's going to be shying away from another main event between the two of them. Merab's a bit of a star in the UFC now. Yan's the champion. They've had 2 fun fights. Let's do a third for the main event. But I think the highlight of this card isn't even going to be the main event. It's going to be the co-main event. Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes. It finally goes down. I've been waiting for this fight for so long. We couldn't see it in 2025 because Amanda Nunes has to pass USADA, or not USADA, but the steroid thing. And then obviously Kayla Harrison got injured. Now's the time. Get it as a co-main event. Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes. Arguably the biggest fight in women MMA history. The GOAT versus the champion. 50-50 fight. I've already had this up a million times, but Harrison versus Nunes is one of the biggest fights. Co-main event of the Merab versus Yan 3 card. I think it's perfect. And a featured fight. Let's also get an All-American, Sean O'Malley versus Corey Sandhagen. Listen, if a UFC genie was true, how many times would they have been wished that Sean O'Malley versus Corey Sandhagen comes true? This has to be one of the highest demanded fights in the UFC that has never gone down. No one wants to see O'Malley versus Zahabi or Sandhagen versus Zahabi. O'Malley versus Sandhagen is what we want to see. For a featured fight on a card where there's a bantamweight belt on the line, this is what needs to happen. They've been building each other up. They've been calling each other out. They've both been at the top for a long time. They've both, I think they'd match up together really well. It's such an intriguing fight. O'Malley versus Sandhagen for a featured fight, I think is as big as you can get for non-title fights at bantamweight. And then for the 4th fight down, I'm going to do Sean Brady versus Joaquin Buckley. Now, this has already been booked, I think, for UFC 328, so just a fight similar to like a Brady versus Buckley. I think this would be a fight that fits on this card. 2 All-Americans, 2 American contenders at 170. Intriguing fight, powerful guy with Joaquin Buckley, grappling heavy guy in Sean Brady, both coming off losses. I think that's a good fight. And then to open up the card, just a fun fight, like Khalil Roundtree versus Volkan Oezdemir. Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, Roundtree's obviously well known, fought Poatan, put up an absolute scrap, and he's had nothing but war since. And Volkan Oezdemir is one of these guys in the top 10 that might not be a big name, but he's usually starching people, or he's getting starched himself. So I think Oezdemir versus Roundtree, just a guaranteed fun fight that you can open up the main card with. I think it's a solid main card. So yeah, just a standard UFC card. Yan Merab 3, Harrison Nunes, O'Malley Sandhagen, Brady Buckley, Roundtree Oezdemir. That's a perfect perfect main card. And then 4, Mexico. Now we're going back to Mexico for this one, and I think this is probably going to be one of the best Mexican main events we've had for a fight night in a long time, and it's going to be Yair Rodriguez versus Kevin Vallejos. This is such a demanded fight now. I mean, this is a perfect main event. Kevin Vallejos might be the best guy on the rise. In the UFC, I don't think there's a more promising contender on the rise than Vallejos. Everybody I talk to thinks this guy's going to be a future champion. I think he's got potential to be a future champion. He needs a big step up in competition after he just starts Josh Emmett. And let's give him Yair Rodriguez, the pride of Mexico in the featherweight division. He's obviously a Mexican contender who's been out for quite some time. He's been out since UFC 314. Let him have a comeback fight. Let him main event his card on his comeback fight in Mexico against Kevin Vallejos. 2 strikers, big implications for the division. This is a perfect UFC no-shame main event. Yair versus Vallejos. Give Vallejos his main event in front of a crowd. Get Yair back in Mexico. Get it done. And then a co-main event as well that's huge. Alexa Grasso versus Manon Fiorot. I mean, I think everybody's going to be on their seats to see Alex Grasso fight again. I mean, after what she just did to Macy Barber, one of the most brutal finishes I've seen in women MMA history, let's get her on a co-main event back in Mexico like she asked for, and I've given her Manon Fiorot. This is the perfect fight. They're both coming off KO wins. Manon Fiorot just knocked out Jasmine Judavicius. Grasso just knocked out Macy Barber. They've both lost to Shevchenko. This is the perfect fight to do. Grasso versus Fiorot for the co-main event, getting Grasso back in Mexico. Title eliminator at flyweight. And then for the featured fight, I'm going to do Davison Figueiredo versus David Martinez. Yeah, this is just another fight that makes sense as well. You've got the Mexican guy in the rising, David Martinez. I don't want to give Martinez too big of a push. You know, he had that close fight with Vera and a fairly close fight with Rob Font. I think Figueiredo's a fair step up. Figueiredo's still talented, but he's definitely past his prime. He's in that situation where he needs to be like welcoming these upcoming guys now. So I think Figgy versus Martinez. Martinez fighting a former champion in Mexico for the featured fight, I think makes a lot of sense. And also, you can't really do a Mexican card without Raul Rosas Jr. So let's do just that. Raul Rosas Jr. versus Vinicius Oliveira. Now, the matchmaking might look weird. I mean, Vinicius Oliveira has just been submitted by Mario Batista, and now you're giving him another grappler up the rankings. And you'd think that Raul Rosas Jr. might want someone higher ranked than Vinicius. I just think it makes sense because there's not really any other major opponents for Raul that make sense at 135, and I think this is one of those performances where Raul definitely has the opportunity to showcase his skills in front of Mexico and ragdoll Vinicius, but I think Vinicius is probably the most tricky striker that Rosas Jr. would have had to face so far in the UFC, so I still think this could be a competitive fight. So I get it done for the Mexican card. Raul Rosas Jr. versus Vinicius Oliveira. And then to open up the main card, you can do something like a Bruno Silva versus Ronaldo Rodriguez. Now, you might be looking at this fight, how is that a good fight? Listen, Ronaldo Rodriguez, if you don't know who he is, he's one of the biggest Mexican stars in the UFC. I think he's got like 2 or 3 million followers on Instagram. He's a huge star. So he's going to be on the main card if he's fighting. And I've given him Bruno Silva, a top 15 guy, a guy who's always kind of a bit of a gatekeeper for the top 15 at flyweight. Get that fight done. And if you're going to do a 6-fight main card, you can even do like a Kaya Sakura versus Edgar Chairez. Massive Japanese star, Mexican guy in the rising Edgar Chairez. I think this is a good fight as well. So that main card for the UFC Mexico is perfect. It's a massive... UFC loves sucking up to Mexicans. This is the perfect card just to do just that. And then even some prelims as well. You can do like a Rafa Garcia versus Nasrat Haqparast. You can do a Santiago Luna getting a step up against Saidna Magomedov. You can do an Imano Rodriguez getting a step up against Clayton Carpenter. You can do like a Veronica Hardy versus... I forgot her name, but there's this new Mexican chick on the rise, and I think Veronica Hardy's the perfect opponent. Even some early prelims too. Daniel Zellweger versus Abdul Karim Selwadi. You know, I forgot his name, but this middleweight Mexican guy on the regional scene can come over and fight Dustin Stoltzfus. You can do some Argentinians. You can do Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Jonathan Mikhailov, or Nikolay Veretennikov versus Auburn Elliott. That is a stacked Mexican fight night card. Stacked to the bone. UFC should do that for UFC No Shame. And then we've got Spain. The UFC have been flirting about going to Spain for a long time, and I think this is the time to finally do it. Now listen, I understand why the UFC might be concerned. To pour you immediately for a numbered event in Spain is a bit risky for your first Spanish event. So let's go with a fight night. Let's do UFC Fight Night Alvarez versus Leon Edwards to kick off this new Spain run. This is perfect. Alvarez versus Edwards is the perfect fight to kick off this Spain run. I mean, Yoel Alvarez is probably the best Spanish fighter outside of Ilia Topuria in the UFC. If anything, he represents Spain more than Ilia. You know, he's a fully Spanish guy on the rise. I think he's nearly finished every single one of his wins but one. He's on like a massive win streak in the UFC. Let's get him in Spain and let's give him a main event. And I've given him Leon. Listen, Leon's just an easy guy to give a main event to. He's a well-known guy, former champion, but also very beatable for Yoel Alvarez. I could see Alvarez finishing Leon easily. So Alvarez versus Leon as a first Spanish main event. Everyone, bro, the Spanish people would fucking die for that. Alvarez versus Edwards, main event in Spain, get it done. And you also need a fun, big core main event, which is what I'm going to do. Manuel Torres versus Rafael Fiziev. This is just one of those fights on paper at 155 you can look at and go, straight banger. Two strikers, two dangerous guys, two guys that are going to throw down. You've got the Carlos Prates of 155 and Manuel Torres. One of the best strikers in Rafael Fiziev. Obviously, neither of them are actually Spanish, but I think, listen, Mexico, Spain, fucking, tomato. Manuel Torres is representing Spain in this one. Let him fight Rafael Fiziev. Good core main event. And then for the featured fight, Alexandre Topuria, the brother of Ilie Topuria, fights Rob Font. Listen, Ilie gets a taste of what it's like in Spain by coaching Alexandre Topuria, his brother, and Alexandre Topuria, being the Spanish fighter, gets a huge push and gets to fight Rob Font. Listen, Alexandre might be the best prospect right now in the bantamweight division, and I think Rob Font's the perfect opponent. Rob Font is in the top 15. It is a big step up, but it's also a very, very winnable fight for Topuria. So you want to give Alexandre a push, let him fight in Spain, and let him get a step up against Rob Font. And then I'd also do like an Alexander Rakic versus Iwo Baranowski. Listen, two Europeans on a Spanish card who you know are going to throw down. Baranowski is one of the best prospects in the UFC right now because all of his performances ended about a minute and it's just him smashing through people. And I've given him Rakic. Rakic is one of those guys who's still very talented for the light heavyweight division but can't seem to buy a win and his chin is gone. So somebody's going to get chinned in this fight. It's a big step up for Iwo. It's a dangerous fight for Rakic. Two Europeans get it done. And then I've even done like a Valter Walker versus Juan Espino on my list. And you might be looking at me thinking, why is Juan Espino on this card? He's like 45 years old and he's not been in the UFC for like 3 years. Listen, my logic is, first of all, what is Valter Walker's style? It's to take you down and get a heel hook. What's Juan Espino's style? It's to take you down and submit you. Age don't matter that much in BJJ. It's going to be a BJJ fight, and you've got a Spanish heavyweight on there for Valter Walker to finish or to upset. So Juan Espino versus Valter Walker. And if you're going to do a 6-fight main card, stick like a Tracy Cortez versus Casey O'Neill on there. Casey O'Neill just got a knockout win. Cortez is the, Spanish-Mexican community. She can fight on this card as well. Tracy Cortez versus Casey O'Neill on this card, I think will be the perfect Spanish main card. And then for UFC Canada, listen, they announced that Gilbert Burns versus Mike Mallett's going to be a main event. What is that? Why are Canadians getting that as a main event? It's awful. Let's do a real Canadian main event. Dricus du Plessis versus Brendan Allen. Now, Brendan Allen last fought in Canada. He main evented, represented Canada, and finished Reina Derrida. He needs a step up. And what bigger step up is there than DDP, the former champion, one of the biggest names in the UFC right now? DDP in a fight night main event is, if anything, he's spoiled for Canada. So DDP versus Allen. Allen represents Canada, gets the step up against DDP. Probably going to be eliminator in the middleweight division. This is the perfect fight to do. DDP versus Brendan Allen as a main event in Canada. I thought that was obvious. I thought this was going to be like the obvious Canadian main event rather than Burns versus Mallet, but that's what I would have done personally. And a bit of a risky core-main event is going to be Robert Whittaker versus Robocop. Now, I understand this is completely random, especially the fact that Robocop just fought. But listen, Robocop took no damage. He's going to want a big fight. Now, listen, Robert Whittaker keeps talking about how he wants to have a light heavyweight fight. Robocop is the closest thing you get into a light heavyweight in the middleweight division. So let's see how Whittaker does. He fights down in the rankings against the most dangerous middleweight on the rise right now. It goes either one or two ways. Whittaker gets back in the winning column, proves he can beat big guys, and then goes off to light heavyweight to beat Ankalaev, or Robocop starts as Whittaker, and we've got a new guy in the middleweight division, which is convenient with a middleweight main event. So Robocop versus Whittaker for the core main event. And then for the featured fight, that's where you can do Gilbert Burns versus Mike Mallet. Gilbert Burns versus Mallet is a good fight. It makes sense. Just not as a main event. This is a featured fight for a fight night type of fight, not a main event. So this is where Gilbert Burns versus Mike Mallet would have fit on the card, and I've got no problem with it. And then you can do something like Nikita Krylov versus Dusty Jacoby. Neither of them are Canadian, but they're two guys who are going to throw down and put in a decent scrap. Two knockout punches, I think it makes sense. And then you can do something like Jasmine Judovicius versus Corinne Silver. I think this is on the Canadian card anyway, but yeah, makes sense. And then even something like a Charles Jourdain versus Kyler Phillips. Canadian guy gets a crack at the top 15. So that would be my Canada card. This is a really, really good Canada card. This is probably the best Canada card the UFC have had in a long time. So those would be the fights that I'd make. If I was in charge of the UFC 2026 schedule, those are the type of fights that I'd be making. Those are the fight cards that I'd be making. I hope this video shows that matchmaking, yes, it's probably difficult and expensive, but it ain't tough. It ain't really tough to make good cards. Let me know your thoughts on these cards that I've made. Thank you for watching.